April Woods, Memoirs, The Ghost Protocol Failure, 7 Minutes to Flee Shanghai Before Betrayal. Part 1. The Setup, The Scent of Copper. They say that when absolute catastrophic failure is imminent, you don't hear a siren. You smell copper, sharp and electric, like blood in the air conditioning vent. For 4 years, I was Ava Chen, a senior financial risk analyst operating out of Lijiazui, the glittering tooth of Shanghai's financial district. My apartment, a sterile, high-altitude bunker on the 88th floor of the Jean Mao Tower, was my prison and my fortress. It was designed to look transparent, offering panoramic views, yet every pane of glass, every meter of concrete, was internally reinforced for signal scrambling and emergency egress. The mission was done. Operation Dragonfly, the mapping of the core logistics vulnerabilities of the PLA's maritime supply chain, was complete, and the extraction order, the Ghost Protocol, had finally dropped. The signal came at 2:17 local time, hidden in the static variants of a licensed Japanese financial news podcast I was required to listen to daily. A sharp, rhythmic stutter in the anchor's voice, the pre-agreed code sequence. Relief was instant, a wave of hot chemical warmth, quickly replaced by the familiar, paralyzing anxiety of the final movement. I had practiced this exit 37 times in drills, every step timed to the 100th of a second. The planned route involved a rapid descent, a quick change into maintenance gear, infiltration of the neighboring construction site, and then a high-speed submersible run across the Yangtze estuary to a CIA-manned fishing trawler waiting beyond the territorial limits near Chongming Island. It was perfect. Too perfect. I started the procedure, moving with the preternatural quiet that only years of living under continuous, microscopic surveillance can instill. The apartment's internal chronometer, usually invisible, flashed green. T-minus 45 minutes until the rendezvous point. I began wiping the primary network drive, the data dissolving into white noise, undetectable even by quantum analysis. But as I reached for the secure hardline receiver, the dedicated red line, used only for exfil confirmation, the coppery smell hit me, overpowering the scent of expensive filtration and ozone. The red line was supposed to chirp 3 times, a high-frequency verification burst. It did not. It was emitting a slow, looping, digitized tone, the sound of a line held open, monitored, and weaponized. They had the line. They were waiting. My world contracted instantly. The Ghost Protocol was already compromised. I knew, with a certainty that iced my blood, that they hadn't compromised the line hours ago. They must have compromised the entire extraction plan. Someone on my side had sold the window. The realization acted like a chemical injection of adrenaline, purging the last vestiges of exhaustion. I killed the power to the entire suite, plunging the 88th floor into engineered, functional darkness. I had to assume the 45-minute buffer was a trap. I had to know how long I actually had. I needed data, now. I scrambled to the backup comms unit, hidden behind the reinforced wall safe, bypassing the security layers with practice speed. The air was silent save for the rapid tap of my fingernails on the rubberized console. The metallic scent was now unbearable, a thick blanket of impending violence. Part 2. The protocol initiation and fatal flaw. The backup unit was shielded against EMP and had its own dedicated, encrypted burst capability, designed solely for emergency analysis, a tool of last resort that burned itself out upon use. I punched the commands, prioritizing an immediate, anonymized scan of known MSS assets within a 5-kilometer radius, cross-referencing their expected response times to a sudden, unscheduled blackout in a high-value tower. The unit flared briefly, heat rising sharply off the case. The results flooded the screen in tight, yellow glyphs. It wasn't just Mrs. It was the Ministry of State Security, Division 8, Counterintelligence, augmented by PLA assets, specifically the Internal Security Detachment of the Nanjing Military Region. And they were moving. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, panic drum. The data provided a critical, horrifying metric: The time between the confirmed alert, my power kill, and physical interception by the nearest high-priority intercept unit, an unmarked black SUV accelerating rapidly down Century Avenue. The system calculated the time, factoring in traffic simulation, access card overrides, and elevator speed projections. The number flashed large, unforgiving, and paralyzing. 7:03. 7 minutes and 3 seconds until highly trained assets breached my primary defense layer. That was not an exfil, it was a fire drill with live ordnance. The copper scent intensified. It was the smell of my own sweat mingled with the ozone from the straining circuits. I abandoned the initial exfil kit, the scuba gear, the specialized thermal cloak. Useless. I couldn't get out of the tower in 7 minutes via the original route. I needed a completely improvised, immediate exit, leveraging the chaotic infrastructure of Shanghai. The betrayal was confirmed when a small, encrypted text file, buried deep within the compromised red line system, was triggered by my attempt to use it. It was a single line of Mandarin, carefully phrased to look like operational error feedback, but I knew the syntax. It confirmed that the mole was not low-level. They had access to the Phase 3 contingency plan details, which meant they knew my identity, my location, and my immediate reaction protocols. The message, Jin Tianbu Hushi. Today, no breathing. A message of absolute termination. The mole, whoever they were, hadn't just exposed the exfil. They had intentionally allowed me to initiate the data wipe, meaning they wanted the data gone, suggesting their loyalty was not to the opposing state, but to a third, unknown entity, or perhaps just to the chaos of my death. The complexity of the betrayal elevated the threat level from capture to immediate termination without analysis. I had to assume that the entire 88th floor was now being watched by directed microwave radar. I shoved the essential data chip, the silver data, into a slot carved into the heel of my boot. This was not the Dragonfly data, which was already dissolving, but a small, irreplaceable file containing the operational identity of every deep cover asset I had interacted with in the last 2 years. If captured, it meant a network collapse of catastrophic proportions. 7 minutes. I looked at the minimalist, Art Deco clock on the wall. The time was ticking down faster than I could process. Part 3. The Watcher's Revelation and Countdown. I didn't waste a second mourning the lost time or cursing the traitor. Anger was a liability. Paranoia, however, was a tool. I moved immediately to the maintenance shaft access panel, located behind a retractable abstract painting. While the main door was reinforced steel and took 45 seconds to breach even with specialized gear, the shaft door was designed for rapid, silent entry, relying on layered sound baffling rather than sheer strength. It offered a straight-line shot to the tower's internal infrastructure spine.
T-6:15 Uhr.
I pulled the small emergency pack from the hollowed-out section of the wall, a sleek, black pack containing 3 essentials: a multi-frequency signal jammer, the acoustic fog, 3 doses of high-grade amphetamines, the razor shot, and the chiral key, a handheld quantum entanglement device that was the operational master key to a dormant, deep-sea communications buoy in the Taiwan Strait, my ultimate, absolutely unauthorized Hail Mary. The chiral key was my insurance policy against the CIA itself, a fact that now felt terrifyingly relevant. As I reached the maintenance shaft, the building's automated systems registered the power fluctuation and attempted to reroute power. This was my brief window of controlled disruption. I initiated the acoustic fog. The jammer pulsed, sending out white noise across Wi-Fi, GSM, and localized tracking frequencies, essentially cloaking the 88th floor in a bubble of silence, deafening the remote monitoring stations for perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds of grace.
T-5:45 Uhr.
I entered the dark, echoing shaft, pulling the door shut silently and locking it from the inside with a magnetic seal. I bypassed the main elevator car mechanisms, knowing they would be priority targets for interception. I began rappelling down the heavy service cables, dropping down floors with controlled speed. My training kicked in, overriding the panic. Muscle memory dictated the grip strength and the precise distribution of weight. Every 6 floors, I paused, listening. The sounds were faint, but unmistakable. The muted thudding of boots above me and, worryingly, the distinct sound of specialized cutting tools being applied to the 88th floor primary entrance. They were not waiting for the police. They were breaching. They were fully committed to termination. I realized the profound depth of the disaster. If they knew the Ghost Protocol, they would also anticipate the logical follow-up, the standard escape routes. I needed to move laterally, not just vertically. Shanghai was not a city of surface streets. It was a subterranean warren of shopping malls, utility tunnels, and unused air raid shelters. That was my only chance.
T-4:50 Uhr.
I accelerated my descent, my hands burning despite the Kevlar gloves. I aimed for the 35th floor, the transition point where the high-rise structure merged with the larger, older core of the building's retail base. This offered access to the pressurized utility conduits, which led directly into the Lijiazui retail network. I had to assume that the primary access points below the 35th floor were already saturated with assets, their faces innocuous, their intent lethal. The failure was total. The extraction team, wherever they were, was likely already neutralized or recalled. I was alone, 7 minutes from being hunted in a city of 25 million people, all moving under the watchful, unblinking eye of the state. Part 4. The immediate pivot, the razor's edge. I landed hard on the 35th floor service platform, the impact sending a jarring shockwave up my legs. The utility conduit access point was sealed by a thick, pressure-locked door labeled HVAC maintenance, restricted access. Standard tools would take minutes. I pulled the miniature thermite charge from the side pouch of my tactical vest, affixing it precisely to the locking mechanism.
T-3:55 Uhr.
I pressed the detonator. The charge fired with a muted, powerful wump dash, localized heat flash instantly melting the alloy. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, claustrophobic tunnel smelling of hot copper wiring and stale dust. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut and securing it with a manual internal lock. A delay of perhaps 5 seconds, but critical. I was now crawling through a 1.5-meter diameter pipe, the sound of my movement amplified in the metallic sheath. This tunnel was connected to the central climate control system of the entire retail complex, meaning it was seldom monitored by cameras, relying instead on pressure sensors and acoustic checks. I needed to be silent. I needed to move like smoke. I crawled for what felt like an eternity, though the internal chronometer confirmed it was only 90 seconds.
T-2:25 Uhr.
The tunnel opened into a large, unused ventilation chamber above the main atrium of the IFC mall. I could hear the muffled sounds of late-night cleaning crews and the faint, synthesized music of the mall's sound system below. The chamber was laced with fiber optic cables and electrical trunk lines. I used my tactical knife to cut 3 specific cables, 2 redundant data lines and 1 major CCTV feed from the main atrium below. This wouldn't stop surveillance, but it would create localized, cascading glitches, forcing the remote surveillance team to manually troubleshoot, buying me precious seconds of visual distortion. I lowered myself through a service hatch, landing in the brightly lit, sterile hallway just behind a high-end French bakery. I was wearing standard-issue, high-quality gray maintenance coveralls, my face shielded by a simple surgical mask and baseball cap, the unofficial uniform of late-night Shanghai infrastructure personnel. I blended instantly. The sudden shift from the dark, tense claustrophobia of the shaft to the expansive, echoing luxury of the mall felt jarring, almost surreal. I checked my reflection in a darkened shop window. Eyes wide, movements sharp, but outwardly calm. The razor shot was taking hold, slowing my perception of time while speeding up my reaction. I was now fully alert, operating on pure instinct and training. I needed to reach the subway system, Line 2, entrance, which was still open for late-night service to Pudong International Airport. That offered the only chance of rapid, deep penetration into the city's chaotic core.
T-1:10 Uhr.
They were already in the tower. They would know my description. The clock was a physical pressure against my temples. Part 5. Shanghai Labyrinth and Environmental Combat. The IFC Mall was my battlefield. At this hour, it was almost deserted, making every single moving silhouette a potential threat. I maintained a smooth, even pace, keeping my posture slightly hunched, mirroring the weary gait of a typical service worker. I passed 3 figures immediately, 2 security guards staring idly at a monitor, and 1 man in an immaculate business suit talking quietly into his cufflink. The cufflink man was the threat. His eyes swept the corridor with a practiced, predatory focus that belied his expensive tailoring. He was Division 8. I changed direction subtly, veering toward the public restrooms instead of the main entrance, simulating a quick pit stop. As I entered the sterile, white tile hall, I glanced back. The cufflink man had stopped his conversation and was now moving toward the restroom entrance, his pace accelerating slightly. The acoustic fog had worn off. They had my position again, localized to the general area of the mall entrance.
T-0:40.
I didn't enter a stall. Instead, I moved directly to the rear service door, using a small, magnetic bypass key to unlock the heavy door labeled Janitorial Services. It led to a narrow, greasy fire stairwell leading down to the loading docks, a far riskier route, but one less traveled by immediate intercept assets. I hit the stairs hard, taking 3 at a time. The cufflink man, hearing the metallic clatter of the door closing, shouted something sharp and terse into his cufflink, the sound echoing ominously in the white tile. He was close, maybe 15 seconds behind. I burst out onto the dimly lit loading dock, dodging parked vans and piles of industrial waste. The dock led directly to the lower access level of the subway station, via an underground passage used for supply delivery. I saw my next complication: 2 low-level MSS watchers, dressed in blue delivery uniforms, standing near the turnstiles, clearly waiting for me to emerge from the main concourse. They hadn't expected the loading dock entry. My sudden appearance surprised them, giving me a crucial advantage.
T-0:15.
I didn't slow. I grabbed a steel dolly stacked with empty cardboard boxes, giving it a violent shove toward the closest watcher. The crash was deafening, the boxes exploding everywhere. The sound drew the attention of the cufflink man running down the stairs. The second watcher reacted instantly, reaching inside his jacket. I didn't wait for him to draw. I pivoted, using the momentum of the push to send a vicious side kick into his knee. He went down with a choked cry. I snatched the radio from his belt, a clear MSS frequency. I shoved the acoustic fog into the frequency and activated it, creating a localized cacophony of white noise and static right where the pursuers were converging. The disruption was minor but effective. The cufflink man, now rounding the corner, paused, confused by the sudden loss of communication and the chaos of the boxes. I vaulted over a low railing and disappeared into the mouth of the supply tunnel leading to Line 2. Time 0. They had breached the 88th floor, and I was underground, running on borrowed seconds, the scent of fear and copper replaced by the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. Part 6. The Temporal Distortion and Subway Warfare. I was inside the subway network, the circulatory system of the city, both my lifeline and my greatest vulnerability. The supply tunnel led me directly onto the abandoned maintenance platform of Line 2, just 2 stops from the core transfer hub at Century Avenue. The train was pulling in now, fluorescent lights flashing across the grime of the tunnel wall. I sprinted toward the train's rear car, knowing the MSS favored the front cars for easy interception upon exit. I slipped through the closing doors just as the electronic voice announced the closure. I was breathing hard, the razor shot pushing my heart rate to uncomfortable limits. Inside the train car, maybe a dozen weary passengers were scrolling through their phones, oblivious. I found a seat near the window, my eyes immediately seeking out reflections. I needed to become a ghost again. I reached into my pack and pulled out a small, specialized USB stick, not for data storage, but for targeted electromagnetic interference, EMI. The silver data chip in my boot heel was highly sensitive and couldn't be scanned through clothing, but the MSS likely had portable, low-frequency radar that could detect the metallic properties of the chip or the chiral key. The EMI stick, inserted into a public charging port, created a localized field of low-level static designed to momentarily scramble handheld detection devices within a 5-meter radius. It was a risky broadcast, but essential for protecting the silver data. the key asset detailing the deep structure of the PLA's hidden fiber optic grid across the eastern seaboard, intelligence that could cripple regional military communications in a conflict. The train pulled into the next station, Laoshangan Road. I saw them immediately. Two men in plain clothes, their focus too sharp, too deliberate, enter my car. They weren't looking at faces. They were looking at silhouettes, posture, and the telltale shimmer of disruption around my location, a sign they had detected the remnants of the acoustic fog. I knew I couldn't outrun them once they localized me. I had to ditch them, now dash. The train began accelerating towards Century Avenue, the main transfer hub. I waited until the train was at its absolute peak speed between the stations. I then triggered the next phase of the EMI stick, a sudden, high-intensity burst of magnetic energy. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The lights in the entire car flickered violently, phones went dead, and the doors momentarily tried to open before locking down again. The two pursuers were momentarily stunned by the power surge and the sensory overload. This was my moment. As the train screeched into Century Avenue Station, I moved. I didn't exit onto the platform. I smashed the emergency door release button, pulling the inner door open, then wedging my hand between the closing outer doors just before they sealed shut, holding the mechanism open. The momentary delay, combined with the electrical chaos, caused a micro-delay in the train's departure sequence. The pursuers, thinking I was exiting, surged forward. I pulled myself back onto the train at the last second, slamming the door shut as the train lurched forward, leaving the two Division 8 operatives stranded on the platform, cursing and shouting into their dead radios. I had bought maybe 5 minutes before they could commandeer a faster route or coordinate the next layer of response. I had successfully used the city's infrastructure as a weapon, proving that while surveillance was constant, it was also dependent on predictable parameters. Part 7. The Interrogation of the Street, the Lantern. My successful maneuver at Century Avenue was fleeting. It only confirmed to them that I was highly trained and improvisational. They would now activate their highest tier of response, localized dragnet sweeps and facial recognition algorithms feeding into every public camera in the city. The subway was no longer safe. It was a pressurized tube of surveillance. I needed to move above ground and disappear into the absolute chaos of Shanghai's historic districts, the Old City, where narrow alleys and unregulated housing created blind spots the modern surveillance grid couldn't easily penetrate. I exited the subway at Xintiandi, blending into the small group of late-night revelers and kitchen staff taking their last commute. I walked quickly, shedding the surgical mask and baseball cap, pulling my hair into a tight knot and reversing the tactical coveralls to the dark, unlabeled black side, a transformation that shifted my profile from maintenance worker to night delivery driver. My primary mission was now reduced to simple survival and securing a new exfiltration vector because the previous CIA plan was ash. I needed a non-agency resource, someone connected enough to circumvent checkpoints and security sweeps, yet outside the immediate orbit of the Mrs. This meant contacting the Lantern. The Lantern was a former Triad liaison who had somehow managed to transition into a legitimate, if deeply shady, maritime logistics fixer, holding grudges against the party and owing me an enormous, complex favor dating back 3 years. He was the definition of high risk, high reward. His meeting location was always the same, a specific noodle stall on Guangxi Road in the Old City, famous for its late-night patrons and the stall owner's deafness, ensuring conversations were never overheard by proxy. I used a deep cover contact number, a burner phone purchased months ago and never activated, to send the coded message, "The vase is cracked. Needs filling before sunrise." This was the signal for immediate, non-negotiable assistance. The reply came instantly, a terrifyingly fast response that indicated the Lantern was either always waiting or already aware of the situation. Guangxi Road. Stall 3. Bring payment in hand. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. It was barely 3:30 a.m., and the city felt like it was holding its breath. I ran the final 2 blocks through the densely packed residential areas, the narrow, damp alleyways smelling of spices and stale river water. I could feel the tightening net. Every face that lingered, every passing motorbike, felt like an immediate threat. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder and saw it, a lone drone, too small and fast to be commercial, hovering silently above the roofline 3 blocks back. The drone meant high-level pursuit. It meant they were tracking heat signatures, not just faces. I was running out of shadows. I rounded the corner onto Guangxi Road. Stall 3 was exactly where it should be, steam rising from the massive woks, mingling with the humid night air. The lantern was sitting on a low stool, wearing a traditional dark blue jacket, stirring a bowl of noodles slowly, pretending to be utterly uninterested in the world around him. His face was a mask of bored patience, but his eyes, when they briefly flickered toward me, were sharp, electric with recognition and alarm. I sat down opposite him, the wooden stool creaking under my weight. The critical 5 minutes was up. Part 8. The Intercept, the First Touch. I hadn't even ordered noodles when the first wave hit. They weren't from Division 8. They were local MSS auxiliary, the cleaners, low profile, heavy muscle, designed for silent, efficient removal. There were 3 of them, approaching from 3 different vectors, moving smoothly through the thin crowd of late-night eaters. They wore dark, nondescript jackets, but their hands were shoved too deep into their pockets, hinting at suppressed weapons, and their eyes were flat, focused solely on my location. The lantern didn't look up, but his posture subtly tensed. He whispered, low enough that only the steam could carry the words, "You brought the whole farm, April. This is not a vase. This is a nuclear meltdown." I ignored him, my attention locked on the nearest cleaner, who was now just 5 steps away, pretending to examine a pile of fresh vegetables. This entire situation was a lethal trap, but I had no alternative. I had to use the chaos of the market. I grabbed the bowl of boiling noodle broth directly off the stall and, in a single, practiced motion, hurled the entire contents, broth, noodles, and steaming ceramic bowl, at the lead cleaner's face. The man screamed, staggering backward, clutching his scalded eyes, disrupting the synchronized approach. The stall owner, deaf and oblivious, continued chopping vegetables. The ensuing seconds were pure, vicious close-quarters combat. The second cleaner lunged over the noodle stall, attempting to tackle me. I dropped low, sweeping my leg and catching his ankle on the slick, greasy floor. He crashed into the stack of metal serving trays, creating a massive, echoing clamor that finally startled the other patrons, causing them to scatter in panic. The third cleaner, more professional, drew a silenced pistol. The sound of the slide being racked was sharp and definitive above the street noise. I couldn't reach my own concealed weapon without exposing myself further. I had to create distance. I flipped the low wooden table we had been sitting at, using it as a momentary shield against the third cleaner's line of sight. I sprinted toward the narrowest alleyway, knowing the width would negate the effectiveness of their 3-man coordination. As I plunged into the darkness, I heard the faint, muffled pft of the silenced shot hitting the wooden shield. They knew my direction, they knew I was injured, my hand was scraped raw from the fall, and they knew my level of aggression. They were now operating under the assumption of extreme danger. My escape, though brutal, confirmed the betrayal and the commitment to my elimination. I stopped just inside the mouth of the alley, panting, checking my pulse. The lantern, miraculously, was right behind me, his face impassive but his eyes flashing. He had retrieved something from the debris of the stall, a small, dark bundle. "You just bought us maybe 2 minutes, April. And you ruined my favorite noodles. Now, we talk price." The silver data was safe, but the chiral key was exposed, clutched tightly in my hand, a beacon of potential leverage that the lantern had immediately recognized in the heat of the conflict. Part 9. The lantern's price and the garbage barge. The alley smelled of damp stone and stale cooking oil, a perfect sensory mask against thermal imaging. The sounds of shouting and sirens, distant, but rapidly converging, meant the MSS sweep was intensifying. We had mere seconds before the cleaners regrouped and cornered us. The lantern pressed the small, dark bundle he carried into my hand. It was a rough, thick wad of currency and 2 falsified maritime crew identity cards. "They've scorched the harbor," he hissed, referring to the heavy patrols now blockading the coastline after the Ghost Protocol failure. Any high-speed vessel is a target. The airport is a cage. You need a ghost route, something beneath their contempt. I have one. His voice was low, gravelly, focused entirely on the immediate tactical need.
A maritime logistics route.
A garbage barge, the silent waste, headed out into Hangzhou Bay, ostensibly carrying industrial residue to a deepwater transfer point before cycling south to Ningbo. It's too slow, too dirty, and too low priority to warrant any serious surveillance. Nobody checks the garbage. The thought of spending days hidden in the putrefying waste of Shanghai was nauseating, but the logic was undeniable. It was the lowest possible profile. The transfer point is 30 kilometers outside territorial waters. My people will meet you there. From there, you're on your own, but you're out of their jurisdiction. I gripped the false ID card, feeling the sharp, crisp edges of the forged government seal. The whole operation screamed desperation and massive risk, but it was the only door open. The price, Lantern? I asked, my voice steady despite the searing panic. He looked directly into my eyes, the neon reflection of the street lights dancing on his pupils. The chiral key, the one you are clutching so tightly. I don't care about your data, April. I care about having access to the old deep sea network. It's the only asset that guarantees my operation's future, once your friends in Langley decide to tighten the screws again. This key buys me untouchable comms for 5 years. That's the price for your life and your freedom from this alley. The chiral key was my ultimate insurance, the tool I had secured specifically to decrypt the remote communications buoy for my own extraction if the agency turned on me. Handing it over felt like losing my last lifeline. But survival was paramount. Without escaping the city now, the key was useless. I looked at the dark, narrow passage ahead, the mounting sounds of the pursuit closing in.
Done.
Get me to the barge. Now. I flipped the chiral key to him. It was a trade of unparalleled risk, the most sensitive decryption tool the agency possessed for a ride on a sewage scow. The lantern caught the key smoothly, tucking it immediately into a reinforced pocket. He nodded, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. We move. They're sealing the exits. We have 60 seconds to reach the river access point. Follow me, and don't make a sound. Part 10. The Epilogue of Smoke and Water. The lantern led me through a dizzying maze of residential tunnels and abandoned storage sheds, structures predating the modern development codes, utterly invisible to satellite or localized drone surveillance. We emerged near a derelict stretch of the Huangpu River waterfront, far south of the tourist docks, where the water was thick and black, smelling of petrochemicals and decay. The barge, the silent waste, was exactly as described, massive, flat-bottomed, listing slightly and utterly covered in grimy industrial residue. Its loading was almost complete. A single, burly crew member, his face obscured by a welding mask pushed up onto his forehead, was waiting. He was the lantern's man. "We are late," the lantern said simply. "She rides down below. No lights, no movement until we are past the coastal checkpoint. You know the drill." I didn't hesitate. I pulled myself up onto the barge deck, the metal slick under my boots. The cleaner team we had fought in the market was now rounding the corner of the warehouse 200 meters back, visible only by the powerful beam of their tactical flashlights cutting through the dense river fog. They were closing fast. I spared a final glance back at the lantern. Who was the mole? I demanded, needing the name, needing the target for the vengeance that would inevitably follow this escape. The lantern didn't answer directly. He simply tapped the pocket where he'd secured the chiral key. Someone who understands the true value of silence, April. Someone who wants the entire structure broken.
Now go.
And live to tell the tale, if only to spite them. I dove into the cramped, dark access hatch leading to the lower hold, the air thick with the gagging stench of the cargo. The crewman slammed the hatch above me, plunging me into absolute darkness. I heard the grinding roar of the barge engine starting up, slow and agonizingly loud. As the massive vessel groaned away from the dock, the floor shuddering beneath me, I heard the frantic, frustrated shouts of the cleaners arriving at the empty berth. They had missed me by perhaps 10 seconds. I was hidden inside a mountain of waste, moving slowly toward the vast, indifferent ocean. The betrayal was confirmed. The mission was a catastrophic failure, and I was stripped of my assets, but I was alive. I pressed the silver data chip in my heel, confirming its security. The game was not over. It had merely changed venue. Shanghai, the glittering cage, was receding into the fog. My immediate future was sewage and silence, but my long-term future was vengeance, sharp and coppery as blood.